Hey anatomy students, and welcome to the endocrine system, one of the last two body systems that we have to cover for this year. We are approaching the end. Hopefully by now you've watched several videos on the endocrine system and you know a little bit about it. It's kind of a underappreciated system if you want to think about it that way, because we'll see that the endocrine system influences all chemical activities. I know here it says metabolic. Think about chemical activities that lead to normalcy, and that's homeostasis. Homeostasis is the state of being completely normal. So this is what's going to hopefully keep us alive and well, okay? And it uses hormones to do that, and we're going to look at several different types of hormones, some that is probably well known to you. You've heard in all kinds of different studies and movies and TV shows, things like that, and then some that maybe you didn't realize is in your body. But there's tons of hormones that are secreted by these endocrine glands. These glands release hormones directly into the blood. Okay, that's what makes them so special. Or the lymph, which we haven't studied yet. Lymph is a fluid that is found in the lymphatic system, and you'll learn more about that later. These are ductless glands, and what that means is there's no tubes, there's no lines running in that carries these hormones. They are secreted, boom, right into the blood, and that's why a lot of them can take a very quick effect, because as it enters the bloodstream, as we know, hopefully by now, the blood reaches all parts of our body. That's what gives us oxygen to sustain life. But as it enters the bloodstream, it moves and goes to all these different places very, very quickly. All right, so a hormone, as we were just talking about, is a chemical that transports a signal from one cell to another. They go to a target tissue and they get a response because of target cells found in different tissues throughout the body. Hormone actually means to excite or spur on, and that's a great name for it because it gets things kicked up. It instigates, it prompts. One that you've probably heard of before is epinephrine or adrenaline. This hormone produced by the adrenaline glands causes a lot of different reactions in your body. Your muscles to become more activated, blood to go to those muscles, your heart to begin racing, pumping more blood throughout your body. It's kind of like a more sensitive thing. So if you're playing a sport and you're getting excited and you kind of start focusing in, almost it feels like your adrenal glands are pumping out this epinephrine, and it's very quick reaction. Think about fight or flight response. If somebody jumps out from around the corner and scares you, you immediately have a response. Maybe that's to run away or that's to punch them in the face. But you can do it very quickly and very efficiently because of epinephrine. Around 50 different hormones, and they regulate all these different keys to life. Things like hunger and sleep and body temperature, when you're going to start puberty, how you handle stress, how and when even you grow. So these hormones are very, very important to normal activity, whether it's on a daily level or it's throughout your life as you mature. Some of the major glands that we're going to talk about, here's a list of them. Pituitary is what we're going to hit on today. Thyroid, which carries a lot of potential for issues if something messes up with it. Parathyroids that go along with that. Adrenals, which are found on top of your kidneys. Pineal gland, the reproductive glands, the ovaries and testes, depending on what sex you are. Pancreas, the hypothalamus, and the thymus. So today we're hitting on the pituitary gland. But before we hit on that, I want you to kind of learn these terms. And these are very simple when you really understand them. Homeostatic feedback mechanisms. So these are the feedback mechanisms that our body has to maintain homeostasis, or that state of normalcy. There's negative and there's positive. Most endocrine glands are under the control of negative feedback mechanisms, and we're kind of going to hear right now on what's the difference in the two. So the biggest difference is that a positive feedback mechanism causes an influx or a positive reaction of some type of hormone and some type of activity. In other words, it's taking us from a state of homeostasis or normalcy to something elevated, right? There's a positive response, not in like a positive, like, yay, this is wonderful, and negative, like, oh, this is so sad, but like a positive in there's an increase, okay? Negative means there's a decrease. So if we need some more of something in our body, the positive feedback mechanisms takes us from homeostasis, which is neutral, which is normal, to this elevated response. Negative feedback mechanism, I'm jumping back real quick just to kind of before you start reading other stuff. A negative feedback mechanism is when we need to go from an elevated response back to normal, okay? Back to normal. Most of the things in our body is trying to return us to a state of normalcy. So think about like our blood sugar. If our blood sugar levels are too high, and if you know somebody with like a condition of diabetes, you know if it gets too high, it makes them start passing out or fainting, things like that. They need to get it regulated. See, that's what the endocrine system most of the time does, is gets us back to normal. That ain't as glamorous as, your adrenaline pumping and going to a positive feedback mechanism where, adrenaline gets the body moving. But think about it. It's got to return to normalcy after that, right? And the endocrine system does that as well through negative feedback mechanisms. So positive feedback mechanisms is taking it, from normal up to something else. Negative is returning it from the abnormal back to normal. And that's why most of the endocrine system is under control of negative feedback mechanisms. We want it to be normal, okay? So an example of a positive feedback is oxytocin, which we're going to hit on in a little bit. It stimulates labor, and this is great since we just come out of reproductive system. So as the baby moves towards the birth canal, pressure receptors within the cervix says, hey, there's a baby getting close to me. It's starting to try to, dilate the cervix. We need something to happen here. Oxytocin travels to the uterus through the bloodstream and makes the muscles in the uterine wall contract even stronger. In other words, it's prompting labor. It's pushing that baby out. When the baby gets in a certain position, the body realizes that. It uses hormones to cause those muscles to start contracting and trying to, push the baby through the cervix and then through the vaginal canal. And then this is that negative feedback. When the stimulus to the pressure receptors end, oxytocin production stops and labor contractions cease. So think about it. Positive feedback is when we release more oxytocin to do something that's kind of abnormal, having a baby, right? Now, what if that didn't stop, right? The uterine muscles would continue to contract, and which would be horrible. We've got to have that negative feedback mechanism in order to get it back to a homeostatic state or a normal state. All right, so let's talk about the pituitary gland. Got about 7-8 minutes here, and that's perfect. This is located on the base of the brain beneath the hypothalamus, and we'll learn a little more about that. It's only the size and shape of a pea. Despite its size, it's known as the master gland because it makes hormones that control a lot of other glands, right? So it kind of controls things. Secretes at least 9 major hormones. Another reason it's known as this master gland. Excuse me. And there's lots of things that can, affect the pituitary hormones, as we're going to see here in a little bit. The hypothalamus does work very closely with the pituitary gland. Hopefully by now you've watched a couple of those intro videos about the hormone cascades, the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid, or the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland, cascade. We see the pituitary has its hand in a lot of stuff. And a lot of times it's not the end results of it, but it's just kind of like a middleman that controls so much going on. Pituitary's got 2 lobes, the anterior or the front and the posterior or the back lobe. We see it kind of hanging down there, almost like little berries. But it's only the size of a pea, kind of in that midbrain. And here are some hormones produced by the anterior or the front side pituitary. One's growth hormone. This is huge because this growth hormone stimulates cells to increase in size, divide more frequently, so mitosis. Of course, it's targeting muscle and skeletal. It makes those grow. Makes them get bigger. Growth hormone is unique in that it kind of stops at a certain point in life if everything is normal, as we're going to see in a minute, kind of the abnormal. But it really gets prompted during puberty. That's why you hit such big growth spurts. You get bigger. Your muscles, your bones get bigger. Now, I mentioned sometimes something goes abnormal, and this is kind of unique and interesting. We see a lot of studies on what happens when the pituitary is affected by whatever it may be. Most of the time, little tumors. Some types of tumors might grow in the pituitary, causing it to either secrete enough human growth hormone or not enough. Here, pituitary dwarfism. There's different types of dwarfism. Some are genetic, but this is caused by a pituitary gland, something being wrong with it. Due to a lack of growth hormone in children, this results in smaller, slowed growth of long bones, about 4 foot tall. Now, it's worth noting here because too many people use it, and it is a derogatory term. The word midget used to be used to describe proportionate dwarfs. You even read science and anatomical books from several decades and years ago. Dwarf or midget would be a term that would be used in a lab setting. It's not proper anymore. It's become offensive. Most people either use the term dwarf. Some circles use little people. So, but you can never go room with dwarf because that is the medical terminology. This is dwarfism. Proportionate dwarfism is when someone is just, all proportions are normal. If you want to think of it like that, notice this, drawing here, the arms and legs is kind of fitting with the body. There is achondroplastic dwarfism. It is a genetic disorder. It's when typically people's heads are a lot bigger and their arms and legs are shorter compared to their torso. Another condition affected by growth hormone is giantism, and this is due to hypersecretion, so a lot more growth hormone as a child. Person that becomes abnormally tall can sometimes be even 8 foot tall, so giantism. Thing about giants is they're typically proportioned pretty well. Sometimes their heads are a little elongated, but it's because their body is so elongated. Acromegalia, however, is a type of giantism where certain parts of the body are enlarged. Yes, they may be large overall, but their feet and hands typically, sometimes facial structures as well, become really large. Now, someone can have giantism and acromegaly. It's definitely possible. So they get abnormally tall and they have abnormally large, parts of their body. A good example, if you like wrestling, Andre the Giant had acromegalia. Also, the Big Show, Paul White, he's still around today. He had acromegaly, and he actually had surgeries years ago. He had a tumor on his pituitary gland. And that's what caused it. Now, after that tumor, things stopped growing, like his hands and feet didn't get any bigger, which can and does happen if you still have tumors that affect the growth hormone. His actually stopped. So he had this condition, and he still had the effects of it, though. He's still abnormally large, enlarged head, feet, arms, hands, feet, worth looking up. Just a few other hormones secreted by the pituitary. Prolactin, this stimulates milk production. We talked about this after birth. This is prolactin is what's secreted by the pituitary gland to cause the mammary glands to start producing milk. Thyrotropin, it's part of that hormone cascade. Adrenocorticotropic hormones, that was a mouthful, also part of the hormone cascade. Gonadotrophins, this exerts action on the gonads. So this is another, you see how the pituitary gland is the master gland. It's causing the gonads to become matured. These hormones are not present pre-puberty. That's why during puberty, the testicles descend, they drop down, the ovaries become active, and oocytes, eggs, start becoming mature. Follicle stimulating hormone, this is one that causes ovulation of the egg. And then you also see luteinizing hormone. This produces testosterone, typically more amounts in males. The posterior lobe of the pituitary, I'm rushing through these, got about a minute and a half. The antidiuretic hormone, this regulates water concentration. It decreases the amount of water excreted by the kidneys. A diuretic is a chemical that increases urine production, and antidiuretic decreases urine production. It's causing us to conserve water so that our kidneys don't just filter all the water out of our body and we become dehydrated. It causes the kidneys to, let some water stay in the body. We need water, of course we do, but we don't need quite as much all the times. So this antidiuretic hormone, controlled by the pituitary, helps with that. And we already mentioned oxytocin, how it causes contractions of the uterus during labor. And that does it. The pituitary gland, there's plenty more glands that we're going to look at throughout this unit. If you need to stop and go back through this and fill in your notes, that'd be perfect. Please use your student notes on quizzes and everything else throughout this unit. We'll be very note heavy. And there's not like a lot of notes, about 40 slides, but a lot of information is packed in here, and we're going to be using it for a lot of stuff. So please go through and get your notes.